Welcome to the Grow Your Business and Grow Your Wealth podcast with Gary Heldt. Gary is an expert in helping business owners put together a plan that will provide a better future for their businesses, themselves, and their families. On the podcast, Gary interviews other professionals who share his vision, and together they share secrets and strategies any business owner can use to build a better financial foundation for your business and your life.
Welcome back to our podcast. Today, our guest is Jamie Barwin with Strobl Sharp PLLC, and Jamie works in the trust and estate practice. Jamie is not only a trust attorney, but she is also a CPA. Welcome, Jamie.
Thank you, Gary.
So, Jamie, tell us some about yourself. What made you? Besides being a glutton for punishment and taking the CPA exam, you also went on and got your law degree. Why would you go this route? Well, what was the burning issue behind that kind of pushed you that way?
Sure. Well, I always have been encouraged by learning and having a breadth of knowledge. I started in public accounting and had focused mostly on privately held companies and family-owned businesses. And a lot of the strategies that I saw were things I continually wanted to know a little bit more about. I considered going the MBA route, but I wanted to go to law school because I was curious about what thinking like a lawyer meant. And I thought it would be something that would be challenging, which it certainly has been, and would also add value to people's lives.
So when you were going through law school and things, did you think at that point in time you wanted to get into the trust and estate side, or what got you kind of into that niche?
Yeah, so by the time I went to law school, I'd actually been practicing as an accountant for a number of years, and I worked for a family office at the time. A lot of the planning that we did on the accounting side was for estate planning purposes, and I wanted to know more. So I ended up kind of going back a little bit later in life. And initially when I got graduated law school, I decided I wanted to give family law a try because it was completely different from what I had previously been doing. And it just, I really liked family law, and it had a lot of great things that actually do overlap with estate planning, and particularly on the administration side. But after I'd done it for a couple of years, I figured out that it maybe wasn't the best area for me, and that I would kind of go back to my accounting roots. Mm-hmm. And estate planning and administration was a good transition because it kind of encompassed all of the skills that I had built up to that point in my career, which I think was maybe I was about, I guess at the time, 7 to 8 years in, which is why I ended up switching from family law but more focused on the estate planning area.
Gotcha. So what are some of the myths and things that people think when they think of estates and more trust, and that you want to dispel? I mean, many
Sure.
times I hear people say, "Oh, well, I don't have enough money to need to set up a trust." Can you talk about that a little bit?
Certainly, and actually that was the first thing that came to mind too, is that people think that you need to have a great wealth to set up or to do trust planning, and that's not really true. It is a myth. You can have various amount of assets. The biggest advantage of trust planning, especially just basic revocable trust planning at any income level, is really just the draw to avoid probate. So even if you went in and just had a will done, and typically attorneys will recommend a will and powers of attorney if you're kind of looking for the most basic of plans, you would still be spending at least $1,000 most likely to have those items prepared. And then on the back end, when you die, who you leave behind, your executor or personal representative, as it's referred to in Michigan, would still have to process your assets through the probate court process. And with the trust planning, you can, if your trust is properly funded, meaning the assets are titled into the trust name that you create, you can completely skip that probate process, and it really just saves time and money on the back end after you die that you can kind of save up front.
Right. So, you know, when the clients are coming in to see you for the first time, what are some of the questions you wish that they would really ask you that they don't?
That's a good question. So when clients come in for the first time, typically they know they need an estate plan, but they're not exactly sure why they're here, other than they need to check it off their list. One of the things that I think is important for clients to ask is, what happens after I establish my estate plan? So you come in, you meet with the attorney, we draft your plan, you come in, you sign your documents. That's not the last step in estate planning.
Mhm.
What you need to make sure you do is fund your trust. And I think at that point, when clients come in to sign their final documents, one of the things that I wish that they would ask, and maybe it's because there's a lot of information being thrown throughout this process, is just questions about their plan in general. And I've had a few clients who I give them their plan and they work on the funding, and then they call me about a month later and they have a lot of questions on their plan. And they always feel bad that they have these questions because we do go over them at our meetings.
Right.
But it always gives me the most satisfaction when they do call, no matter how far in advance after their planning's done, and ask those questions. So I think that's really important. And one thing for people to know is, don't be afraid to call and ask your attorney what you may have talked about a month ago, because it's easy for us. We do it all the time, but we do understand that clients don't do this all the time and they need to kind of absorb it at their own pace.
Yeah, because I know I find lots of times when I'm doing tax planning with clients that, you know, not always is everybody good at putting things in layman's terms. So that's part of the issue that they have. But then also, just like you said, they're basically drinking out of a fire hose,
Mhm.
and they need to kind of be able to sit back and absorb this information and then come back to you. Um, One of my practices that I try to do with clients when I meet with them and talk with them annually about their taxes is trying to talk to them about life changes and things like that. How often should somebody come back to their estate attorney to update their trust or their will or any of the documents that you prepared for
Mhm. I think you're exactly right on. Anytime basically a life change happens, and in my mind, that's a birth, a death, a marriage, a divorce. That's always a good time to revisit your plan. It doesn't mean you need to do a complete plan update.
them?
It may mean that, but a lot of times if it's a birth, or in some cases a death, you may just need to revisit your plan and make sure that the right people are named. So I think if you don't have any life changes, so everything kind of is going status quo for 2 to 3 to 5 years, I would probably revisit it at that 5 year mark, because what we do find is that even if there aren't any life changes, that you realize when you revisit your plan with your attorney, there will be at least one thing that comes up that isn't exactly the same as you thought it was. Things like, so you may have named a friend at one point or a colleague, and since then you switched jobs,
Right.
and you've kind of lost touch with that person. So maybe you don't want them to be the guardian of your children at some point. So I would just recommend life events, as you mentioned, and then at least every 5 years.
Okay. What are some of the fears that when the clients come into you, what are some of the big fears that they have, and how do you help alleviate those?
Mhm. So the biggest fear is death that we deal with. I've definitely had clients be very, very alarmed at the conversation that we have, and I think that it's not something people like to think about, which is you know pretty normal, but that's definitely one of the biggest fears. And really, you should think of it as you know saving some headache to the people you leave behind, rather than maybe focusing on your death. But in our planning, we do powers of attorney as well, which a lot of times those are in effect, or go in effect when you're incapacitated. So also a fear is not being able to make decisions for yourself. And then I think the other fear is just kind of understanding the process, the estate planning process, and what it means and what you're signing. And you do put a lot of trust and faith into the estate planning attorney that you are meeting with. And so one recommendation I have is to meet with a couple. A lot of times initial meetings are free of charge. So it's really important to find somebody you're comfortable with, because it's not even just one plan and then you're done. It really should just be a relationship. Even if you're not visiting them every year, it's helpful if you can establish a relationship. The attorney knows your family. I think that also alleviates a lot of the client fear, and because they learn to trust, it becomes a business working relationship.
So you mentioned the power of attorney. If someone has a power of attorney over, a friend's stuff or a parent or whatever, what happens with that power of attorney when, mom or friend passes away?
Sure. In most states, or at least I'm licensed in Michigan and Illinois, when someone passes away, the power of attorney generally becomes ineffective. There are certain clauses, so you can include in Michigan a clause on organ donation. Obviously, that would run a little bit after your lifetime, but for the most part, once somebody passes away, their power of attorney is no longer valid.
Now, so if I have a power of attorney over, my mom's stuff, does that also give me, advanced directives and things like that? Or is that something that we need a different document for?
Sure. So that actually also depends on the state. I know in Michigan, our medical power of attorney form, our designation of patient advocate, does include language with respect to do not resuscitate, because there's not a specific law in Michigan regarding that. So it's really just a state determination.
Okay. So if I have power of attorney over my mom's stuff and she passes away, what is it that I need in her death to be able to take care of all of her stuff?
Sure. So you're saying if she has if you have you have a power of attorney over her financial assets,
right?
And she has no other planning.
Mm-hmm.
Who's in charge when she dies?
Right.
So the power of attorney, as you had suggested and I mentioned before, that would no longer be effective. So anything in her individual name would have to go through probate, which if she has no other planning, would end up going to whatever her defined heirs at law are. And that is a definition that's dependent on the state you live in. And the state it's basically an estate plan the state has for you if you don't have a will or trust in place.
So it really sounds like, okay, if somebody doesn't do the proper planning here, then basically we're putting this in the hands of the state to determine what happens.
Right. And that's not always a bad thing, because sometimes, you end up wanting your assets to go to certain persons, but there is a little bit of a risk there, and there's an additional cost that you can avoid by putting together an estate plan.
Okay. What are some of the common mistakes that you see clients make?
That's a good question. Some of the common mistakes I see clients make, probably the biggest one that we already talked about is not funding their plan or not knowing that they need to fund their estate plan after they sign the documents. Because if you don't fund it, then your documents aren't ineffective, but it just takes a little bit longer to get your assets to where you want them to go, and they may not go exactly how you wish. So that's one of the bigger issues, and really that comes into play if you have trust planning versus just a will. So just to clarify that. One of the other mistakes, and I don't know if this is a mistake, but oftentimes people will put together plans and they may not communicate that they've named somebody in their documents as a fiduciary. So that would be an executor or a trustee. And, it's not necessarily, like I said, a mistake, but it's always helpful if the person that you name in your documents is aware and kind of can be prepared. And it's particularly helpful if it's a power of attorney, because that person's going to be acting while you're still around. So you're going to know what's going on to a certain extent.
Right.
On your level of, capacity and ability to be involved. And so it's just hard when there's not a lot of communication between a person and their fiduciaries. And one of the other mistakes, and this is definitely with planning that's a little more complex, maybe even planning that involves family businesses, is not communicating with your kids on a transition plan. Or your employees, or whoever you decide you want to take over your business, or how you want it handled. So communication is really a big piece of this whole process.
Yeah, I have seen that a couple of times where there's 5 kids or whatever, and mom and dad didn't tell which child that they were going to be the one who's going to handle everything, and then suddenly that child, it's dropped on them and they're like, I don't want to do this.
Right. And it's a big job. It's not just not a glamour position.
Right.
Unless you're an estate planning attorney, and this is
right. Then you deal with it every day, so it's okay.
Then you like it.
Right. So what are some of the big challenges that you're facing right now? It could be COVID related or non-COVID related, but what are some of the big challenges that you're finding right now in the estate planning side of things?
I think amongst my clients, one of the bigger challenges right now is, we still haven't, I don't think we've elected a president yet.
Not as of the start of this interview, it hadn't.
Yeah. So one of the bigger challenges right now is with some of the clients that are higher net worth, is, what kind of planning do you put in place? Depending on their age, it also may change, because there's concern about the estate tax exemption being reduced, which we can easily plan around, but it's hard to pinpoint that right now. And you want to be efficient for your clients, so you don't want to do a plan for them now and then have them come back in 6 months. You kind of want to draft a great plan for them, and they can have some reprieve from you for a little while until you come after them asking if they funded their plan. So that's one of the bigger challenges. Another challenge is just just having people understand what their plan entails, and making sure that they're aware of, like, not necessarily even just the documents, but possibly even the tax implications of their plan, because depending on again what the law is at different times, there's advantages to, and depending on income level, there's advantages to giving assets now versus later, or later versus now, especially if you're considering recommending your clients take advantage of a step up in basis on their deaths. So those are kind of the bigger challenges, only with our political climate for the most part.
Okay. So, it definitely sounds like you guys try to be proactive in your planning with your clients, and looking at, should we give now, should we wait, and things like that. What things have you learned over time? Because you've kind of done, a bunch of different jobs type thing, and then now into this. What have you learned now that you wish you knew back when you first started out?
What have I learned? What have I learned now that I wish I knew? Actually, one of the things I'm continually learning is that you don't have to always know everything to be able to direct people appropriately, and that it's great to be able to use the resources around you to help kind of build out a team of people. So when I was younger, you think you have to know exactly everything. And really I find in my practice, I work best when I'm working with clients and their advisors. So, I am a CPA, but, it's better when I'm working in my role as an attorney with tax knowledge, and then working with a CPA who's got a lot more tax knowledge. And then on the financial advising side, not feeling like I need to, be concerned about their finances, but to be able to work, as a collective team. And that's not even necessarily with clients that have a lot of money. I mean, a lot of people have an accountant and they have a financial advisor, and that's at various income levels. And so just, kind of, knowing that I can leverage and we can work across a team to bring more value to the client.
Right. And I mean, I totally agree with you there. With my practice, we're very much on the team approach and, more holistic to make sure that everybody kind of knows what's going on. Because I think it's, again, really important. You talked about that the client may not fund their, their plan and things like that, where if the CPA is involved and the financial advisor is involved, along with you, then it is kind of like, okay, hey, we all collectively need to get this ship going in the same direction.
Mhm.
And I always think that's really important for us to do. Give me a couple of reasons why somebody should use a professional like you in doing their estate planning or, wills or any of those documents that they.
So I think the biggest advantage is that you're paying for our service. So you're paying for somebody to understand and explain these documents for you. Not for you, but to help you understand and explain them. And I don't know that you always get that if you're, taking a form off of the internet. I don't know that people fully comprehend exactly what they're signing. And as part of our process, a big piece is the education and the follow-up. So again, not to harp on the trust funding, but if you're going to pull a trust from the internet, you may not know that except for after listening to this podcast, that after you sign the documents that you need to, make sure things are properly titled. So I think that it's the value is really in the service that you're being provided, and then also in the relationship that you're establishing, and that's why I recommend using a professional. And not only do I do estate planning, but I do probate and trust administration, and there's a lot of nuances on the back end. So when somebody dies, and state laws that need to be followed that people don't, the information is just not necessarily available, and it's something that we're very well versed in. So we can make sure that your trust is, or your will is properly administered in accordance with the state laws in which you live.
Right. I think I really like something you just said there, is because not only do you do the planning with it, but you also do the administration on the back end. So in my opinion, that helps you, both sides, because if you're doing the administration and you run into something, it's like, oh, well, I got to make sure that, I update any plans that I've done to take care of that issue and vice versa. So I think that's really important in somebody who only puts together the plans and has never done the administration. It's important. I mean, it's kind of like me giving tax advice and never filling out a tax return.
Right.
So what does your ideal client look like?
What my ideal client is somebody that just needs help, that wants to do an estate plan, and they need help. They have questions, and they come in and they've kind of thought about, their plan a little bit, but need some guidance, and that's on the estate planning side. On the estate and probate side, or the administration and probate side, again, I think I get the most satisfaction out of assisting people. So somebody that needs some help, and most of our clients, it's funny, they think they don't they're incapable of certain things. But I think one of my big jobs, and this is on both sides, is just kind of helping empower clients to realize that they actually do know a lot, and they can do a lot on their own. They can use our services as much as possible, which obviously is great for us because we charge, because of our fees. But I do find that the best clients and the best relationships are those where I'm not necessarily doing all the hand holding. I'm just kind of providing the information and certain legal advice, and then clients are, like I said, empowered to do things on their own. And I think it's particularly helpful in situations where there's a married couple and one of the spouse dies, because if you're married, or even if you're in a long-term relationship or relationship with anyone, it takes two. And people end up doing, people have complementary duties, and a lot of times, maybe the surviving spouse may not be the one that was doing all the finances. But it's really cool to see, if the person that survives is the one that wasn't taking care of the finances. It's really cool to see them be able to feel capable to do that.
Yeah, it does. It definitely gives them a newfound, respect for what the other person did. But then, just like you said, the empowering of it, and you can really see it in them as that happens. So, for these ideal clients and things like that, what is it that you want them to do before they come see you, or is there something you want them to do before they come see you?
We have a questionnaire that we send to clients on the estate planning side before they come to see us. That I think it's helpful they don't even have to complete it, but just to look through it and kind of see some of the questions that we'll be asking. I think too, just be prepared that we're gonna ask you about your financial world.
Mm-hmm.
A big part of estate planning is to make sure everything's in order, because ultimately it's your assets that are going to be going to, and your personal items that are going to your beneficiaries. So just not to be alarmed that we're going to ask for some personal financial information. On the estate administration side, there's not a whole lot that you need to do before your first meeting. Maybe consider bringing in some death certificates with you, because we'll definitely need those at some point. But just, having some well-organized questions that you've thought of along the way is useful. And I would also recommend, when you come to any of those appointments, just being clear on what the next steps are. So we usually advise our clients that, this is our process. We'll send you an estate planning proposal, and then, and this and that, just so you can be on the same page. But, if your attorney doesn't communicate that to you, just ask, well, what are the next steps? So you're not just sitting out there waiting for them to send you something.
Right.
And on the administration side, maybe asking your attorney if there's a checklist of items that you need to be aware of as you're kind of navigating this. And while you're asking for their help, there's definitely, things that you'll need to do. And I would think most firms would have some sort of checklist that you can walk away from your first meeting with, at least having some direction on what to do next.
Right. Now, Jamie, if our listeners want to connect with you and learn more from you, how would they reach out to you?
Sure. So I can always be reached on my work line, my cell phone, or my work phone, which is 248-205-2766. And I can be reached via email. My email is jbarwin, so JBARWIN @Strobl. That's an STROBLPC.com.
All right. Thank you. Today, our guest has been Jamie Barwin with Strobl Sharp PLLC. We really appreciate your time and all your knowledge.
Thank you, Gary.
This show has been produced by Market Domination, LLC. To discover how you can have your own show completely done for you and turn it into a real published book and become the authority in your marketplace, go to www.marketdominationllc.com/podcast offer.